32 teams in 32 days. Today, the Miami Dolphins. Welcome to a series where we deep dive on every NFL team's offseason from the very beginning, when head coaches were being hired, all the way to present day with preseason happening. Here's a list of videos that we're going to be dropping for 32 straight days, from August 1st to September 1st. If you see a team that you're a fan of, I encourage you guys to hit that subscribe button so you can stay notified when we drop that video on that respective date. Going into the 2025 offseason, the Dolphins, they needed to address a couple of things. One, make sure your players are fully healthy, and if anyone were to get hurt this year, you have the proper backups in place so you don't skip a beat. And two, the short yardage situations on offense, running the ball a short yardage. We'll talk about that and see if they address both those situations, but first, let's take a look at the coaching profile of Mike McDaniel, who's going into his fourth year with the team. 28-23 record as a head coach, so very successful. First 2 years had winning seasons. However, last year, it was kind of a weird year with all the injuries that they dealt with, especially to Tua Tagovailoa. Offensively, they just weren't great. Even the offense performing so poorly, getting 8 wins is actually not that bad. It's actually kind of very similar to the situation of the Colts. If you watch that deep dive video that we came out with on the Colts last week, where the passing offense just wasn't great, but somehow, some way, Shane Steichen was able to pull out 8 wins. Same situation with Mike McDaniel. But despite the poor performances on offense, Mike McDaniel has stated that he will be calling the offensive plays in 2025. I know that might upset some Dolphins fans. However, I will say the Dolphins have been a top 5 offense the previous 2 years, the first 2 years under Mike McDaniel. Defensively, they're led by Anthony Weaver. They're kind of a middle-of-the-pack defense, at least last year they were. But I will say that they did lead in one category across the entire NFL, and that was yards before contact. They got to the ball carrier much faster, much quicker than any other NFL team. And that kind of sums up Anthony Weaver's philosophy. He loves pressure. He loves relying on his front seven, the D-line and the linebackers, and limit the reliance on the secondary. And that actually sums up with how free agency and the trades went for the Miami Dolphins. If you look at the losses, it's a big list. Their entire secondary is going to be brand new, fresh starting lineup in 2025. Kendall Fuller is gone, Javon Holland, Jordan Poyer, all these guys move on. Jalen Ramsey as well, they traded away. They acquired Mika Fitzpatrick. Kendall Sheffield was signed on May 12th, so it was a late signing. Artie Burns, unfortunately, he's going to be missing this entire season because of an injury, but where the reliance comes in is that front seven for that defense. And on that front seven, they lost Calais Campbell, but they did replace him with another guy in the NFL draft. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But on that offensive line, they lost Robert Jones and Teron Armstead. He retired. But they did sign James Daniels to a 3-year, $24 million contract. And then their backup quarterback situation, last year it was Tyler Huntley, Tim Boyle. I think every NFL fan will tell you those two quarterbacks, as far as a passing offense goes, probably not the most reliant to have when your offense is built around the passing game. They did try to fix that in free agency with Zach Wilson, and they even doubled down on that, adding a QB3 in the NFL draft. I'm talking a lot about these draft picks, so let's go ahead and look at the draft picks of the Miami Dolphins. Round 1, pick 13, Kenneth Grant, the big Michigan defensive tackle. Now, going into the draft, he is labeled as a defensive tackle. However, Anthony Weaver loves to run a 3-4 defense, so we expect him to technically play defensive end, but he can switch to a defensive tackle in some 4-3 packages. It's kind of similar to Calais Campbell, actually, who left in free agency, and he's now with the Cardinals. Going to be playing in that 3-4 defense as a defensive end. And then to the second-round pick, Jonah Savaiinaea, the offensive guard from Arizona. So Robert Jones moves on in free agency. Teron Armstead, we talked about, he retires. So we'll talk about the projected starters, the depth chart for offense right after the draft picks. But what we expect is Savaiinaea to immediately become a starter in day one, because James Daniels, we expect to be that right guard, Savaiinaea to be that left guard, and then Teron Armstead's spot, we expect it's going to be Patrick Paul, the second-round pick from last year, that steps up into that spot. And then they didn't have a pick for 2 rounds, rounds 3 and rounds 4, but the remainder of the draft, they made sure to add some quality depth, especially with that 6th-round pick, Ollie Gordon II. Again, that short yardage situation, the goal line back, they needed to address that situation because Raheem Mostert, they thought it was him because of the season that he had In 2023, 19 touchdowns, which is insane. But with the injuries to Tua, this offense becoming a little bit more predictable. They have high hopes for Jalen Wright to be that short yardage back, as Tyreek Hill has said that he wants him to be that short yardage back. But if he doesn't pan out, Ollie Gordon, who has looked great in that preseason game against the Bears, could step in to be that running back 2 behind Devon Achane. And then that backup quarterback, so Zach Wilson, they added in free agency. No more messing around. They want a passing quarterback to the best of the ability that they can get in case Tua Tagovailoa were to get hurt again. So they doubled down on it. They got Zach Wilson, but then they also added in Quinn Ewers, the quarterback from Texas, in the 7th round. And with the projected starters on offense, starting with quarterback, Tagovailoa, the QB1, obviously Zach Wilson. We just talked about this. They doubled down, adding Zach Wilson to free agency and then drafting Quinn Ewers. We expect them to carry 3 quarterbacks on the roster. They do not want to deal with the quarterback carousel that they dealt with last season. And then moving to the skill position players with that running back position, Devon Achane, the RB1, they utilize him in special ways. He's not going to get 250, 300 carries, 200 to 220, and then in the passing game, going to get about 80 to 85 targets. Jalen Wright, right now, we have as the RB2, but can Ollie Gordon step up and overtake him as that short yardage back? They did sign Alexander Mattison. Unfortunately, in that preseason game against the Bears, he suffered a neck injury, and he's going to be out for the remainder of the season. And that kind of sucks because, honestly, Alexander Mattison more than likely could have been that RB2. He was looking great in camp. He had multiple days back-to-back where he looked pretty good, and it was trending in that direction. But it's between Wright and Gordon. The wide receivers, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, are going to be the top 2 guys. Now, they did have a dip in efficiency last year. Again, that was because of the lack of downfield passing. Can they return to that 2023 form or even 2022? Jalen Waddle had a career year. That wide receiver 3, Malik Washington, shout out Gwinnett County, Parkview High School, who has worked his way up and is now a wide receiver 3 with the Miami Dolphins. Over at tight end, Jonnu Smith has been traded, and Darren Waller gets signed almost immediately after that trade happened. So they had a plan in place where they're going to get Darren Waller to come out of retirement after taking a year off. I will say this, if you expect Darren Waller to have the level of production that Smith had last season, more than likely, probably not going to happen because naturally McDaniel does not feature the tight end position that much. Now, I will say that Jonnu Smith had a career year last year, heavily featured in McDaniel's offense, but again, that's because of the lack of downfield passing. You have to do a lot of checkdowns, and even when Tagovailoa was back, yes, Smith did go off, but if Smith, you're having a career year, you become a big part of the offense. Let's not change what's not broken. But this year, don't expect Darren Waller to have that level of production. Mike Gesicki is a perfect example of a vertical tight end that is not featured in Mike McDaniel's offense. So just hinder your expectations with Darren Waller. And with that offensive line, we talked about the shifting that they're going to be doing. James Daniels, their big free agent signing, is going to be at right guard. Right now, we have the 2nd-round rookie, Jonas Avenaya, as the starting left guard. Liam Eichenberg, who was a starting guard last year, he's dealing with an injury currently. But if he returns, can he battle with Avenaya for that starting left guard position? And then we mentioned a couple years ago, they drafted Patrick Paul in the 2nd round, and he'll be replacing Teron Armstead over at tackle. And to the projected starters on defense in that 3-4 defense, 3 defensive linemen, everything looks the same except Kenneth Grant. He'll be taking the place of Calais Campbell, and we expect the 1st-round rookie to be a day 1 starter. Over at linebackers, Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb were dealing with some injuries last year, but they seem like they're healthy. Chop Robinson could be working in as a rotational piece. Now, I will say this about Chop. Right before we started filming this video, we got news that Robinson was carted off the field. However, literally right before we started filming, we saw on his Instagram story him saying that he's okay. So wipe the sweat off your eyebrows, Dolphins fans. Chop Robinson will be playing in 2025. And then in the middle, Tyrell Dotson and that big free agent signing with Jordan Brooks, signed a 3-year contract. He'll be playing middle linebacker. And over at the secondary, this is where the biggest shifts happen on defense. Gone are Jordan Poyer, gone are Kendall Fuller, gone is Jalen Ramsey, and in comes in Melifonwu at safety, Mika Fitzpatrick at safety as well. Welcome back to the Dolphins. And then the outside corners, we have Storm Duck and Kendall Sheffield for now. Cam Smith was a starting corner last year for the Dolphins. However, his performance last year, it was a little below average. So we're expecting a new change here on that outside corner spot, and we expect it to be one of the free agent signings. And we're giving it to Sheffield because Jack Jones was just a signing in response to Artie Burns tearing his ACL. So we expect it to be Sheffield, the veteran, that's going to be starting at cornerback. And then they also added in Mike Hilton. I will say, though, given his age at 30, he's probably going to be playing more of that nickel spot, that slot corner position, not so much on the outside. And then to the projected starters for special teams, Joe Cardona. He's the new long snapper in town after Ferguson. They moved on from him. Actually, Cardona was with the AFC East rival New England Patriots. That was a surprise release, but Cardona is now with the Miami Dolphins. Ryan Stonehouse will be the new punter, comes from the Tennessee Titans after they moved on from Jake Bailey. Other than that, Jason Sanders, reliable kicker, and then Malik Washington returning kicks. Now to projected stats for the quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. Starting with that quarterback position with Tua Tagovailoa, 4,500 yards passing. If a 17-game season were to happen, hopefully it does. 30 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, and actually underratedly very accurate with the ball, 69%, nice. Percent of the time, we expect he's going to be completing his passes. So back to a form. Just how he is every year, a top 5 passer, it seems like, as far as passing yards go, if he plays all 17 games. Actually, in our projections, we have him 3rd in the NFL in passing yards, right behind Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow. No question about it. He has great targets to throw to. And one of those guys is Devon Achane, the running back. As we mentioned, heavily utilized in the passing game, so his passing numbers, 82 targets on the season, 69, nice. Receptions, 518 yards, and then 5 receiving touchdowns. On the ground, 203 carries, 1,100 yards rushing for 5.6 yards per carry, which is actually pretty freaking good on 200 carries. Now, we do project him 9 rushing touchdowns. This is just kind of based off of a 17-game pace. This stat line, all this is considering playing with Tua and playing with backup quarterbacks, because if you saw last season, all the skill position players, their efficiency dropped heavily. So if you factor those in along with some games played with Tua, this is still the projected stat line over a 17-game span. Achane is still expected to have a pretty good season. Now, if Tua does play all 17 games, these numbers, the sky's the limit, honestly, on what Achane can do on the ground and through the air. And speaking of the air, let's talk about the wide receivers with Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. What we expect for them is to get back to the form that they were at. 148 targets, 101 receptions, 1,394 receiving yards, and 10 receiving touchdowns for Tyreek Hill. For Jalen Waddle, 120 targets, 83 receptions, 1,245 yards, and 5 receiving touchdowns. Again, just like Achane, factoring in the poor quarterback play that they had. So taking an average of 17 games from the last 2-3 seasons, this is considering when they played with those poor quarterback performances. So if Tua plays all 17 games, these numbers, they could only go up. And that's crazy to think that Tyreek Hill, almost 1,400 yards receiving, 100 receptions, and 10 touchdowns. What can he do if Tua plays all 17? And then moving on to tight ends, as we mentioned when we talk about projected starters, be aware of the lack of production at the tight end position this season. It's not going to be like a Jonnu Smith type year. What we expect, again, for Darren Waller, there's that number again, 69 nice targets for Darren Waller, 52 receptions, 536 yards, and 4 receiving touchdowns. So he's still going to be utilized as a weapon in that Dolphins offense, but don't expect someone that took a year off coming out of retirement. Don't expect an all-pro level season from Darren Waller. And to wrap up the video, we have projected record on the Miami Dolphins. I don't give just one record and say that anything outside of that is wrong. I like to give a window, say that minimum how many games we're going to win, maximum how many games, a floor and a ceiling. So Dolphins fans, I think you're going to be very pleased with this because my floor for them is 8-9, which is the record that they had last season. A similar situation to the Cincinnati Bengals. If you watch that deep dive video that we came out with a couple of days ago, where the minimum, the floor for them was the season from last year. Everything just went wrong for the Bengals last year. So we expect their floor to be 9-8. And then last year for the Dolphins, same thing. Everything that you could possibly imagine went wrong. They've gotten better. There's no chance that they get any worse than 8-9. So that's what I expect for them, is 8-9 as their floor. And then their ceiling, I have 10-7, which you may look at this and say, why is the window only 8 to 10 wins? You don't expect them to be any better. There's no possibility that they could be better. Looking at their schedule, early on, it's actually very winnable. So they could start 5-2 because the only tough games that I see on the schedule in the first 7 weeks, Buffalo Bills and the Los Angeles Chargers, which honestly, those both games, they could win. They're known to split with the Bills. And then the Chargers, I would say, is kind of right around the level of the Miami Dolphins. But then their schedule gets a little bit tougher after that. They have a 4-week stretch where they're facing the Falcons, the Bills again, the Ravens, the Commanders. They have their bye week, and then after that, the Steelers, the Patriots, the Bucks, the Bengals. Yeah, early on, it's going to be pretty easy for the Dolphins. Later on, the schedule is going to get pretty tough. That's why I expect only 10 wins, 10-7. Still, though, it's a very good record that's good enough to make the wild card in the postseason. At 9-8, they may make the postseason. Actually, when I was mapping out the schedule, several teams finishing 9-8. Just the tiebreaker, the Dolphins. If some games, a couple of games go a different way, going 9-8 may be good enough to make the postseason. But those are my thoughts on the 2025 Miami Dolphins, the deep dive, analyzing everything centered around this team. If you agree or disagree with anything that was mentioned in this video, leave a comment down below. I'd love to interact with you. Make sure you guys subscribe to this channel as well so you can stay up to date and notified when we come out with more videos in this 32-team deep dive series. Tomorrow, we're discussing the Atlanta Falcons. Can Michael Penix Jr. take the reins and ascend in his sophomore year with all the offensive weapons that he has around him? With all that said, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll see you tomorrow.